Hi, everybody. So the video today shouldn't take too long. So we're going to be talking about the scientific revolution. Obviously, scientific, we're referencing things having to do with science, and revolution, we've already said, is a big change that's going to happen. If you remember earlier this year, we talked about two types of revolutions: political ones that have to do with an overthrow of a government. The way to tell if something is political is involves in some way the people trying to overthrow the government. They normally start with the name of a country, like the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution. All three of those were political. Now, on the other hand, non political ones are nothing that have to do with the government, but are big changes somewhere else. The scientific revolution is going to be a big change to the things we know with the science that it comes to our universe and a lot of things involving medicine as well. The industrial revolution that we'll talk about in the future, from hands to machines. So when we're talking about the scientific revolution, even though we've started to go in order with the class, realize that this is going to start, sometime in the 1500s, in the mid 1500s, and last into the 1700s. So realize this time period is kind of going on throughout most of period one and even to the start of period two. So as we talked about things happening at the same time, the scientific revolution is something else that's happening mostly during period one into period two. So they're going to use classics against other classics. One of the ideas reborn in European society during the Renaissance was a concept known as Greco Roman logic. That should sound familiar. Hopefully, you realize this picture over here is the School of Athens by Raphael. With this style of thought, intellectuals rediscovered the idea skepticism, to doubt and question things that are accepted as true. One way this concept was applied to the knowledge established by the ancient Greeks and Romans themselves. One of the reasons for this development was because by the 16th century, new inventions, technologies, and math provided an effectively new way to test ideas that have always been accepted. So these ideas that come from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and if you remember over the summer, your summer work was looking at some of these, scientific truths, medical truths that people just accepted. But these are going to be starting to question again from the Renaissance skepticism during the scientific revolution. Telescopes, microscopes, thermometers are going to be new inventions during the scientific revolution. Obviously, know what telescopes and microscopes can do. So if you ever need to come up with inventions, of the scientific revolution, I think those would be helpful. One helps us understand the universe on a much larger scale. One helps us, study bacteria and diseases and, on the smallest scales. So challenging the classics. The three primary thinkers who were starting to be questioned from old times was Ptolemy's idea of the universe. This is also called the geocentric model. He believed that the United States. He believed that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that the sun and the other planets rotated around it. Galen's work on human anatomy. Remember the four biles: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And he thought that the reason people got sick was because one of those biles had too much or too little. And Aristotle's idea on gravity and pretty much everything else. Aristotle had an idea that because of gravity, heavier things fall faster than lighter things, and that's not true. For the most part, like if you put things in a vacuum with no wind, anything like that, you can look up a cool video on YouTube where an astronaut on the moon drops a feather and a rock at the exact same time, and they fall right down to Earth. So these ideas that have been around for hundreds or even 1,000 years are going to be questioned during the scientific revolution. One of the first big questionings of this classics came from Copernicus in the 15th century, so early, Renaissance time. Using math to prove his point, Copernicus asserted that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and in fact that we orbited the sun. Crazy idea at the time. Hopefully you realize, living in 2020, Copernicus is going to be correct. This new model challenged Ptolemy's geocentric model that we talked about earlier with a new heliocentric model of the solar system. So, one of the major changes from the scientific revolution was how we viewed our place in the universe. Think about it: with religion and man being put on earth, the Catholic Church taught that because God put humans here on Earth, Earth is obviously the center of the universe because everything, revolves around Earth and these humans that God made and put us only here. So that's Ptolemy's geocentric model. But Copernicus is going to come up with the idea of a heliocentric model that says, no, wait a minute, the sun is in the center and the planets rotate around it. Now, Copernicus didn't have all the answers at this time because these are things that are just starting to be questioned, but there are going to be future scientists and astronomers that come along and help prove his point. So this is just, the geocentric model right here, Earth in the middle. This is the new Copernican or heliocentric that shows the sun in the middle. So unfortunately for Copernicus, the heliocentric model was dismissed by the church as heretical and went unknown by most people. So his work is really not going to spread at the time, and many people wouldn't have known about him because the Catholic Church is going to see this as going against God, going against the Catholic Church, and they're basically going to prohibit any of his work from spreading. Remember, the church didn't like, sciencey things that are going to disprove them. However, by the late 16th century, a man named Galileo had invented a telescope. After months of observation, he was able to confirm Copernicus's theory that yes, he's right, the center is in the center. Another large idea that was disproven by Galileo, and I mentioned this earlier via experiment, was Aristotle's theory that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. Remember, we said they fall at the same rate of speed. In anatomy, Andreas Vesalius, who studied anatomy, is going to begin dissecting cadavers, which are dead bodies. During most of the Middle Ages and even into the Renaissance, this was a no-no. It was illegal in many places, especially Catholic places. Certain places like the Netherlands only allowed one body to be dissected a year. But by doing that, Vesalius is going to learn a lot more about human anatomy and the makeup of our body. They're going to find that Galen's theories on anatomy were completely wrong. All of these new ideas caused an uproar in science and church. If the classic authors in the church were wrong for so many other years, how do we know what's right? What else could they be wrong about? So you can see how this would even help with the Protestant Reformation, because if the church can be proved that they've been wrong in so many of these teachings, what else can they be wrong about? Because remember, this is happening over a long time period during period one that we've already talked about. So these people are important to know, and their discoveries, what they did. And if I'm sure, like if you type any of them into Google, like if you don't like the information that I gave you or examples, I'm sure you could find like one specific thing that you can remember for each person that you think is easy. So William Harvey, he's going to write a book called On the Movement of Heart and Blood. Basically, he's going to be the first person to understand blood flow through the body, like the function of the heart, and that the heart is pumping to put blood all through the body. Studies, veins and that type of thing. So basically, it discovers how our blood, how and why it moves throughout our body. Paracelsus, what makes a man ill also cures him. He's going to put and start working on these vaccines that have some poisonous things to men when in big doses, but that can help cure some diseases. It's going to contradict many traditional medical theories and founded new ideas on observation to see how things work. And then we've already talked about Vesalius a little bit. He's going to make careful dissections and basically found the science of human anatomy. He is going to be one of the leaders of human anatomy that can start to, because he's dissecting dead bodies, can go through them and explain human anatomy and how humans function on the inside. And Kepler was another astronomer and mathematician. He's going to understand the rotation of the planets and how gravity works. He's known for his three laws. You don't have this slide, and it's not important that you write it, but it's just another good example to know. He's known for his three laws of planetary motion, which are planets move in orbits shaped like an ellipse. A line between a planet and sun covers equal areas and equal times, and how long a planet takes to go around the sun is related to the radius of that planet's orbit. Now, you really don't need to understand the science behind a lot of these things, so don't get caught in with that. What you do need to understand is that the scientific revolution is going to promote skepticism, questioning. It's going to change people's view on the church, and it's going to point out that all of this information people believed for many years was wrong. It also brings about this new method of checking to see if facts are true facts, the scientific method. So the focus for obtaining knowledge became known as the scientific method. Something is only true if it can be tested, observed, and repeated. Keep in mind another reason why the church would like this. Religion, even today, like one thing is that if you're religious, you have faith. God is not something that in flesh and blood can be tested in that way. So you can again see how the church is going to have some problems with this. It was a combination of skepticism and proof that you should doubt or not believe anything that cannot be proven by mathematics or testing. Again, you can see how that comes in conflict with the Catholic Church. This change in thought was known as the scientific revolution, a new process of proving what is true and using some of the new inventions earlier we went over to accomplish that. Thinkers such as Isaac Newton, I'm sure you've heard of him, took this idea even further and established a set of laws for the universe based on math, testing, and physics. He's basically going to be the founder of physics. So if you struggle in your physics class, you can be upset with Isaac Newton. Not only did Newton define universal laws, but he also designed and developed calculus. I said physics, or I think I said physics earlier. He's going to invent calculus, which allowed mathematicians to solve far more complex problems. And these are just some of Newton's laws. Again, you don't need to understand the information behind these scientific things, but you should know the people and what they're made, at least one of their major discoveries, to give you something to write about on an SAQ and be able to at least explain a little bit about it. You don't need to be a scientist to answer these questions the same way you don't need to be an art major to answer the art questions. So these two new methods of reasoning are going to come out. The first one by Francis Bacon is called inductive reasoning, using evidence, patterns, and observations to supply a strong evidence that something is true. So an example of that, if the population in 1950 is 1 million, 25 years later it's 1.5 million, and 25 years later it's 2 million, what would the population be in 2025? If we're using evidence, patterns, and observations with inductive reasoning, if there was no other major event that happened, obviously it looks like it's going up by 0.5, 500,000 every year. So it would be 2.5 million in 2025. Deductive reasoning by Descartes is a different way of going about this. It's using logical deduction to make a certain logical conclusion. All men are mortal. Harold is a man, therefore Harold is mortal. The only way this works is if both of these are like right, because if you make a statement that's not true, obviously it's going to be the other way. So Francis Bacon invented inductive reasoning, and Descartes the deductive reasoning. Into the addition of Bacon, Newton, and Descartes, monarchs and governments began to publicly fund scientists or figure out the universe. So monarchs, especially in Protestant areas, are going to pay money to have scientists study these things, which is why we learn a lot about scientists from this time, because there was a lot of money involved, the same way artists did for the first time during the Renaissance. They began royal societies of scientists whose jobs and lives were dedicated to questioning, developing, and testing new ideas. One of these specific royal societies was the Royal Society of London. Just you see people getting together and talking, discussing their ideas. So this is going to be important to realize that scientists can now make a living this way, doing experiments, stuff like that. So during this time, even though we are talking about new scientific inventions and new ideas on thought, the same way the Renaissance was a rebirth, the same way the printing press is going to increase literacy, we got to remember that over time, these things happen slowly. In the 1600s, many people still believe, had traditional views on magic and witch hunts, and peasants passed down these oral stories of things that have happened in the past, and people believe them. Curses, hexes, magical potions all continued in Europe as well as the Americas. If you've ever, heard of Salem, Massachusetts, and the witch trials that came there, that's long after the Renaissance. The scientific revolution is in swing. But realize just because these changes are starting to happen doesn't mean the most common person would have any idea. Many people, still believed in dark and light forces and witchcraft, magic, all of these other things. And you might be saying, hey, Mr. Weaver, I still believe in those things, and good for you. Some key concepts to go over. You should know the names that are here. You should know Bacon and Descartes, inductive and deductive reasoning, new ways to find things out, the scientific method. I hope this information was helpful. Again, when it comes to the scientific revolution, yes, you might get specific questions about, what person invented what. You might get some type of LEQ or DBQ or SAQ where you need to, provide an invention of the scientific revolution and explain, how it was new, how it challenged old ideas. So make sure you know the people, what they did, and understanding that the scientific revolution is going to promote skepticism. It's going to question things that are true. It comes from that Greco-Roman logic, because realizing a lot of the things people thought they knew were actually not true. All right, have a wonderful day, y'all. Message me with any questions.